I'm Loki Karuna, and this is TRILLOQUY. Happy New Year, and thanks so much for circling back to the show. It's always an honor to have each and every one of you listening. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'd like to get started by offering my condolences and prayers to those impacted by the fires out in California. I'm actually planning on offering a few words in the triloquy of the next opus regarding the wildfire, so I'll say more on that in a few days here. But for now, I just wanted to make sure that I offered what I could. Definitely thinking about y'all. There are even composers out there, musicians who have been impacted, chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo for your successful traversing of this true tragedy. I'm also sending lots of gratitude to those who are fighting the fires, especially those who have come from outside of the country. We have folks from across California, across the United States, of course, but Canada, Mexico, and I even saw an Instagram post of a group from South Africa, a group of South African firefighters. So thank you for sharing your humanity and coming together in this time of tragedy for so many people. What I will be talking about in the triloquy of this opus is interracial dating and relationships. Thanks to today's guest, I'm honored to feature Damian Geter here, who is a multiple threat, to say the least. He's an accomplished singer, he's a composer and composer advocate, and a really all-around mindful person. I've been following him for a long time now, so it's great to have been given the opportunity to chat and get to know him a little better. Anyway, coming up this spring is the world premiere of his latest opera, which is themed around the court case of Loving versus Virginia. Now, if you're unfamiliar, this is the court case that made it all the way to the Supreme Court that actually made interracial marriage legal. There were, while there are many opinions on this today, to this day, on both sides of the issue, I think it's phenomenal that the history and the conversation around this is coming to the opera stage, thanks to composer Damian Geter, and he's here to talk all about it. In addition to diving into Loving versus Virginia, we also chat about his career in general, his background as someone from Virginia, and lots more. To get us into my chat with Damian, I'm going to share a little bit of a different composition since the Loving versus Virginia opera isn't quite out yet, at least not in recorded form. The first time I learned about some of Damian's work was through a commissioning initiative spearheaded by All Classical Portland, a radio station out there in Oregon. And one of the resulting works of that commissioning initiative was a new string quartet by Damian called Neo Soul. It's a really cool piece of music that I've had the opportunity to share digitally. I've programmed it on live concerts. Shout out to everyone at the Lakes Area Music Festival. And I think it's a really great example of the phenomenal work that he does, bridging cultures and communities all through this so-called classical music. So I hope you enjoy this excerpt from the first movement of Damian Geter's Neo Soul String Quartet to get us into my conversation with him. Cheers.
Self-care is very important to me. I am a man of a certain age now, and it is paramount that I take care of myself because if I don't, then none of this stuff can happen. So, I mean, I'm somebody who works out, and it's the first thing I do in the morning. I used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and work out. I don't do that anymore. So I get up whenever my body tells me to get up. And I go to the gym, and that's the first thing that I do. It enables me to clear my mind, think about the day, and just kind of get ready. It puts me in a good mood, things like that.
What are you
And
listening to at the gym, if anything?
oh, it varies. Lately, I've been listening to Mariah Carey Christmas music. I don't, so, I mean, if I'm writing something and I need a bit of inspiration, I will play something from the classical realm, but mostly it's like R&B or hip hop, something out of that world. Um, and I try to make time for my partner and my friends, and I'm realizing the social aspect of being a human being is very important.
Hmm.
It's mental health, and so I make sure that I take care of all those things. I'm actually a really good planner, and I'm a good um, uh, time manager, time management person. So I set goals for the week or the day or the month, the year, even less than a year, but and I'm able to carve out time for myself outside of work.
Being such a great planner, I'm sure your scores must be pristine. I mean,
Well, I have an engraver for that because if I didn't, it would not be clean.
it's hard for me to, the more people I talk to these days since the election, it's hard for me not to sort of have that in the back of my mind. Working so long in radio, years ago, the argument was, oh, we listen to this music to escape all of the noise. But I've long argued that there's never been a separation between the current events of a day and the Western classical music that's produced. I mean, we can look at Beethoven, Shostakovich, and all the folks of today. All of that, to say, I also acknowledge that many composers believe in creating what they want to create, music for music's sake, and I also affirm that. I wonder where you fall on that spectrum. Are you sort of a music for music's sake person? Are you the Nina Simone, it's an artist's duty to respond to the times? Where do you fall?
I mean, I think I'm a little bit of both. You saying that sentence, Shostakovich, Beethoven, those are my two, and Britain. Those are my three loves
Hmm.
there. And I think because maybe they do have sort of a political leaning. But I think I fall in the middle of that because there are times where I feel like as an artist, as a composer, that I want to make a statement. And then there are other times when I just want to make music. I think that I'm living in the world of I just want to make music right now. But I have a feeling that that's going to change very soon if it hasn't already. I think that people's expectations are that being a black composer that I will always write something that is political.
Mhm.
And quite frankly, I don't really want to do that. Um I think that I'm not sure that I even have a responsibility to do that at this point. I think if I choose to do that, then that is a choice that I make. And if I feel like I have something to say, then I will do that. And if I don't, then I will just write a song about a flower if I want. So I think I'm firmly in the middle. These days, I'm probably more in the music for music's sake camp, just because of, people's expectations can be quite heavy at times.
Sure, absolutely. And with those expectations and what you want to do noted, much of your music has centered blackness in a really beautiful way. I wonder where that comes from. Did you grow up in a household where blackness was really engaged? Are there lived experiences that are behind it? Where does that sort of inspiration come from for you?
Certainly. I mean, I grew up in a house where we were taught, well, first of all, I want to say I grew up in Virginia. I grew up in a kind of a rural area in Chesterfield County, which is the county that's directly south of Richmond. And I live in the very bottom part of that county. So there was like farms and tobacco farms, pig farms, and things like this. And I had a wide array of black teachers growing up. So I talked to some of my black friends and my black colleagues, and they're like, "Yeah, we didn't have black teachers until we got to college." But I would venture to even say, I don't know if most of them were black, but it was pretty evenly split.
Hmm.
And so so having said that, and also in my household, my parents instilled in me the need to know about Black history. they sort of went out of their way to make sure that that happened, whether it was happening in the school or not. And
Hmm.
it kind of was happening in the school, but I think I got most of that um, from my parents. And I think that, this is a lived experience that I am living, and I think that artists can speak, speaking from the eye perspective, write some of the best stuff from that perspective. And I think that me being black affects everything that I do.
Hmm. Hmm.
Walking across the street, you know. And so it's just sort of a natural extension of my work, I think. And I'm very proud of it.
We spend a lot of time, I hate using the word outreach, but for the sake of this conversation, when we think about outreach or exposing new audiences to this music, I see people really centering what they call inner city communities and those sorts of things. But I think we often forget about the challenge of connecting this art form to folks who live in more rural areas, places where you can't drive to an orchestra in 15 or 20 minutes, maybe even an hour for some folks. Now that
Mhm.
you're mentioning that you grew up in sort of a rural Virginia, what did that story look like for you? Did you drive up to Richmond all the time? What did that exposure look like?
No, it didn't drive up to Richmond. Richmond was the big city that was like an hour away. And the closest big city, I guess, big city was Petersburg. And so I spent a lot of time in Petersburg, and that really wasn't a city. It wasn't a suburb, but it wasn't a city either. It was a village. I can't describe it. I don't know. Maybe you know Petersburg, but and there they had sort of a professional, semi-professional orchestra. So I heard the Petersburg Symphony, which had a lot of black folks in it,
Hmm.
by the way. And I took piano lessons from actually the guy came to my house, and then I started to go to his house, which was a couple towns over. And so my exposure to classical music came from my parents when they bought those Time Life records of Beethoven and Tchaikovsky. And I grew up in a house that was very musical. So, and we listened to all types of music.
Mm. So where did the concept of composer come to play? There are so many people who see something or hear something and want to do that, but you
Mhm.
don't see a composer in the same way that you see a performer. So how did that fire spark within you to compose music?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So as a child, so my grandmother lived with us, and we had an organ at home, and
Oh, wow.
she played the organ. So I took I mean it wasn't like a pipe organ. It was kind of a small organ, but I took organ lessons as a kid, and with that same piano teacher, actually. I started off on organ, and then I switched to piano. But uh, through my organ lessons is where I got into composing because of the improvisation that takes place in organ. Now, I cannot play the organ today, so don't no one call me. So, um, but because of the improvisation that happens, as an organist, he was the first person to say, you can just make it up. And I was like, make what up? I'm supposed to play the music that's on this page. I can't make this up. Other people do that. Other people write the music and then I play it.
Mhm.
And it was then where I was like, something sparked in me. It was like, oh, actually, I can write the music. And so from that point on, I was, writing little melodies here and there.
So how do you connect the dots between, oh wow, I can write music to, oh wow, I can make my living writing music? Was there a moment where you felt like you finally made it? Did you get a big check and you said, oh, okay, so this is it? What was the story?
I mean, I've had some big things happen that would make one think that you've made it, but who know? How do you quantify that? There's still so much more that I want to do. I mean, the act of me being this was not on my list of things to do.
Mhm.
If I'm being honest with you. I don't tell too many people that because I know that might infuriate some folks, but I hadn't planned on being a composer. That was not on the list. But it was a calling that I just sort of leaned into and was like, okay, I guess we'll do this. And I'm enjoying the ride. Um, and I was a music education major, bachelor's in music education, and so it goes back to your previous question. I never really saw people who were outperforming and doing the classical music thing where I'm
Mhm.
from, for a living. And, growing up, my parents worked in, factories and things like this. And I knew people who worked at the post office and they had government jobs, so to say. And, they had benefits and things like this. And none of those people were professional musicians. I had an inkling of one person who was a a cousin of the family. You know what I'm trying to say? A
Yeah.
cousin,
Play
and
cousin.
and that person who I don't think I ever met was on Broadway. And actually, Roy Belfield?
Not by name, no.
Oh, okay. Anyway, he's an organist, pianist. He and I went to the same church.
Okay.
And so those two folks were the people that I kind of knew about, but I didn't know anybody who was like making a like that's all they did. So
Mhm.
for me, that seemed kind of far out there.
I'm always careful about the way that I use the word composer because there are some folks like Valerie Coleman, shout out to Valerie Coleman, who, that's what she wants to be called. She is a composer. There are other music creators who feel like there's some baggage around that word composer, not to mention folks like you who do so much more than write music. You perform, you've been on TV. I wonder how you weigh the identity of composer against all of the other things that you do. When you walk into a room, do you introduce yourself as a composer, multidisciplinary artist? I wonder what your relationship is with this idea of composer.
It depends on the context, honestly. I used to just say I'm a musician, and that sort of covered it all. But then people would ask more questions, and so I felt like I had to start being more specific. So nowadays, I just say composer.
Okay.
Yeah, and then sometimes I no, I mostly say composer. I'm not singing as much, and that's a little bit by choice, just because of the way it's just getting hard to do everything. So I don't really say I'm a singer that much anymore, but so I just say composer because that's the one that I'm doing the most of right now.
Sure, sure. And you're certainly a part of a very, very significant and influential group of composers. I definitely want to talk about Loving versus Virginia, but before we get into that, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Blacknificent Seven. For folks who aren't familiar with this collective, I wonder how would you describe it and what's the work or the purpose of this group?
You know, hopefully this doesn't disappoint a lot of people, but we're just a glorified text group. We're a group of friends. We get together, we talk about things in the industry and we talk about things outside the industry. We crack jokes on each other and we hang out with each other whenever we can. In fact, we're gonna have a hangout here in a couple weeks. We talk about, you know, salaries, money, contracts, um, things that we should be talking about that people get funny around talking about money and stuff like this.
Hmm.
So we bring things like that to the group. We if we could offer a commission and we can't do it, we bring it back to the group. Hey, anybody available to do this commission? I've gotten folks commissions. We're a support system for each other, and it is one of the most important things in my life, I will have to say. We've done the African Queens with Karen Slack, and we did the thing at CSO about a year ago now. And so people are making us out to be this sort of official thing, but we are sort of officially unofficial in my eyes. So I mean, who knows what the future holds? And I'm happy to be a part of this group. I mean, it's not unique, I don't think in any way. Um, so that's kind of what we are.
See, you've got me curious now. I fully understand and really appreciate you're talking about how, you pass commissions along amongst yourself, really creating these opportunities. But when it comes to some of those contractual conversations or those money conversations, what's the action that comes after that? Let's say you find out that Jasmine Barnes isn't getting what she deserves from a presenter. Do you band together and and send an email, or what comes next?
Yeah, no, we don't sort of meddle in each other's stuff, but we try to prevent that before it happens. So like if somebody in the group, because I've written 5 operas now, if somebody in the group has a question about an opera contract, I don't have any problem with telling them how much I've gotten paid and all the stipulations in the contract because, maybe that person doesn't have the experience that I have in that. And, and I do the same thing, for big orchestral works. I might say, hey, what is this? Does this sound right to y'all? Or, things like that.
Mhm.
Um, we've one time we had to sort of take up for ourselves because, we got some haters out there too. I'm just gonna say it.
Sure.
And I don't know, I don't know why. We literally are a group of friends.
Well, if you don't have haters, you're doing something wrong. That's what I was always
Right.
taught. So you mentioned that you've written 5 operas at this point. Where do you even begin when it comes to writing an opera? It seems like such a hefty task when you think about the music, working with a librettist, what the staging what will look like. Where do you start?
Yeah, so I'm very good at focusing on the job that I was hired to do.
Mhm.
I don't think about staging. That's somebody else's job. So I mean, where do you begin? That's a good question. You begin with the collaborator. If the story hasn't been presented to you, you come up with a story and you and your collaborator librettist, um, work on the story. And it starts with sort of a synopsis of what this opera is going to be about. And then the librettist goes off and writes the words for the opera. And then I take the words and, sometimes there's a libretto workshop and sometimes not. I think most cases nowadays there is a libretto workshop. So workshop that, tweak it. I like for the story to be pretty much what it's going to be before I start writing, and then I go off and start writing now. Now, while all of this is happening, I'm not just sitting around eating McDonald's. I'm
Sure.
thinking about what this is going to start sounding like. So I'm not starting from scratch um, ever.
Yeah, and on that point, on librettists and these librettist workshops. So does that mean melodies? And sorry to get inside baseball here a little bit, but I'm just curious. So are melodies written or rewritten in accordance to how the lyrics should go, or is the librettist job simply to make the words work on the melodies you've written? What is that process?
So the words come first.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then I write the music based on what I'm reading. I have this thing where I read and I hear music. So, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad music. But I can look at a line and come up with a melody almost immediately. So it may be that and when I'm in the thick of it, I might be writing this line and I'm like, oh man, this would be really perfect if this was just a 1 syllable word. So
Hmm.
I'll go back to the librettist and say, hey, can you make this a shorter word? Um, or can we maybe cut this chunk of words because I feel like it might be getting a little too long or something like that. So in that way, we're always collaborating throughout the process.
So when it comes to Loving versus Virginia, what was it like collaborating with Jessica, the librettist? Did you find it to be a very smooth sort of collaboration and partnership?
Yeah, Jessica is awesome. I would write 1,000 operas with Jessica. Jessica was a friend because I met her because her when I was singing, I did Porgy and Bess at Seattle Opera, and her kids were in the chorus, and I met Jessica then when she was living in Seattle. And I used to live in Portland.
Hmm.
And then she wrote a kids opera called Earth to Kinsey, which I did the workshop for. I sang in the workshop up at Seattle Opera. And then we've been always just trying to find something to do together. And then when Virginia Opera, Jen Arnold actually called me and approached me about writing Loving versus Virginia, I was like, oh my gosh, this is this would be perfect for Jessica. She's in an interracial marriage. And at first she paused. She was like, I just need to make sure that this is the story that I should be telling. So
Hmm.
that right there tells you everything you need to know about Jessica.
Yeah.
You know, she's so kind and she's so smart and she's so good. And I really like working with people who are kind and good,
Yeah,
period.
and shout out to Jen Arnold. I'll say that at some point years ago, I was looking. I needed some music to fill in just a little bit of space in a radio program I was doing. So I sort of sent out some feelers, and Jen said, "Oh, you got to program Damian Jeter's Neo Soul." And ever since the first time I heard it, that's come up more and more and more. So definitely
Yeah.
shout out to Jen for connecting dots, and shout out to you for that piece as well. It's a really great piece
Oh,
of.
thanks. Yeah, Jen is awesome. She if I ever write a book, she will get her own chapter. She has been a champion of mine from very, very early on. So I love Jen.
That's wonderful. Well, back to this opera, Loving versus Virginia. Before we cut on the microphones, I share with you that this was a historical tale that had not made it to me. So I'm really glad to be exposed to this now. But for other folks who aren't familiar with the story behind this court case, I wonder if you can share.
Sure. 1967, Richard and Mildred Loving are an interracial couple living in rural Virginia. I think probably in a community very similar to mine. And before 1960, I think it was 1967. 1967, it was illegal for interracial marriage um, to exist. And so they were not able to get married in the state of Virginia. So what they did was they went to DC and got married, and then they moved back home.
Mm,
Um, s- so all the problems that you would think from coming out of the 50s and civil rights and things like that, they encountered. So it became this big case. These very simple sort of down home people became these national treasures in that their case was taken all the way to the Supreme Court, and it was their case that said that interracial marriage was actually should be legal across the land, and so it was a national um, effect across the country. And the biggest thing about that is they were barred from living in Virginia. I can't remember how long it is. I was maybe 20 years or something like this.
mhm.
They were not allowed to live in Virginia. And if they came back, they would be thrown in jail. And so the thing that Jessica and I really wanted to hone in on was the fact that they just wanted to come home.
Mm.
They just wanted to be, with their families in the house that they grew up in, and eventually Richard built them a home. But yeah, they were not allowed to live in the state of Virginia as an interracial couple.
Wow.
Um, yeah. So in 1967, the Supreme Court, um, I mean, their case got all the way to the Supreme Court. That is kind of crazy to think about.
Mhm.
And yeah, miscegenation laws were outlawed.
I want to pull on that thread that you're talking about, honing in on their desire just to come home. I wonder how you think of home, and I asked that question because I grew up in Tennessee. I grew up in Memphis, and I love my home. There are
Mhm.
certain conveniences about living in New York, especially socially, that
Mm.
I really treasure more than this idea of living in my hometown, despite the degree to which I love it. I wonder how you personally think about this idea of home. I mean, Virginia must be a place that challenges you in some ways.
Certainly, but I have to be honest, I love going home. I love home. Every time I go, I have very fond memories of home. I had a really nice upbringing. Um, uh, I mean, my community was really interesting because it I'm sure there were people in the Klan who I went to school with and who I was like kind of friends with.
Sure.
in a way. So I mean, that's the kind of community that I grew up in. But I really love home, and the fact that I was able to write this with Virginia Opera and be composing in residence with the Richmond Symphony. I mean, that means a lot to me. Um, Now I don't want to move back. I like living in Chicago. Um, but I really like being home, and and that's actually something that I was able to kind of lean on when I was writing the opera, like this desire to go home and to be around your people. And the only thing that saddens me a little bit is when I go back and I see the people who are kind of revered as a child, or everybody's getting older now, and I'm the age that I remember them being now. So there's a little sort of melancholy that comes along with it, but for the most part, I really like being home. I mean, Virginia is a weird place, but for the most part, I really love it.
So, for the two subjects of this opera, do we get much of their backstory? I mean, for many people, it would be hard to understand in that time how these two people's paths would even cross, much less how these two people would fall in love.
Yeah, you get a little bit of the backstory, but we only had a certain amount of time. So, we start off with them, not even their first meeting. We start off with them kind of so they would gather at drag strips and racing cars and things like this,
Oh, okay.
and that's what that community did. And so they. Oh, and by the way, black folks and white folks intermingled freely,
Mm,
no problems. Um, and so this community would get together at these drag strips, and so our opera starts with them at one of these drag strips, not at the very beginning of the relationship, but sort of still in the honeymoon stage. Let's just say, and you get a little bit of the backstory as the story goes on, but for the most part, there's no act about Mildred, and there's no act about Richard. It sort of unveils itself as the opera goes along.
mm. I think it is easy for many people's knee jerk to think about the context of this story within anti-black racism, but as I'm sure you know, the unfortunate truth is that even today many black folks and other people of color are challenged by this idea of interracial relationships. Even looking up a picture of this couple, looking at Richard, and maybe it's the fact that it's in black and white, I don't know, it's easy to just make assumptions about who he was back in
Hmm.
that time until you see him next to his wife. um I wonder how you consider the impact of this opera beyond the stage. I know we earlier we were talking about music for music's sake, but it seems like there has to be some extra musical component or goal or initiative behind a piece of music like this.
I mean, I think one of the main things that I want to kind of live in is the fact that, and you even said it yourself, a lot of people don't even know about this case.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't know that there were laws that said black people and white people cannot get married. Lots of folks don't know the two people who changed that. And so one of my main goals is for people to just know the freaking story, and to know your history, and to know the history of this country, and to know that that actually wasn't that long ago,
Mm-hmm.
when all of this stuff was going down. And so if there was any extra musical thing there's an education piece that I feel like needs to be tapped into.
Reading about this story and preparing for our conversation, I obviously couldn't help thinking about my own life and my own white partner, and all of the baggage that goes there. Me feeling segregated from certain black spaces because there's a white man on my arm. So for many people, this story will have a personal slant to it in that way. I wonder if there are other just sort of personal aspects of your life that informed your writing this music. You already talked about being from Virginia. Are there other aspects, personal aspects that are in the cake mix, so to speak?
I mean, certainly this was the case that was kind of the precedent for, quote unquote gay marriage,
Hmm.
and I am somebody of the alphabet tribe and so in that sense, yes, there, but I have to be honest with you. Anytime that was brought up, I didn't shun it, but it was not at the forefront of my mind when I was writing this piece because this case was about black and white. This case was not about anything else, and yes, it did set the precedent for things to come. My focus was on the issue of actually, black people cannot marry white people.
Hmm.
And that was my focus, and that was really kind of the only thing that I was thinking about. Now that the piece is done, I can say, oh yeah, and it was the precedent for o Oberfeld. I can't remember the case, Oberfeld, and so I can think about that now, but that was not my focus when I was writing this. I think the main thing that I was sort of tapped into was the fact that these were people from a community that was very similar to mine, and they just wanted to be home, and really leave people alone. Let people let people marry who they want to marry and leave people alone.
Hmm. Indeed, indeed. Another thing that I'm thinking about is this historical precedent. If we're talking specifically about anti-black racism, this idea that black men were out here just to steal all the white women, and that sort of thing.
Right.
This case sort of flips that on its head because it's a white man and a black woman. I wonder if you think the story might have been different if it were the other way around, if it was a black man trying to marry a white woman.
I have thought about this, and I do think that it would have been different. Just because of the history, as you said, of white folks being afraid that, you know, black men were going to come and take all the white women and impregnate all the white women, and it was so sexualized, right? I mean, that was the basis of all of that. And I do wonder if it was flipped. I don't know what the answer is, if it would have been different. Part of me thinks that it would have, and part of me thinks that it might not have been, because it still took them, what, 17 years for
Sure.
this to even get up to where it needed to be, or however long it was. It wasn't a short amount of time. So, but you bring up a good point. I don't know what the answer to that is, but part of me thinks that it may have been a little bit different, and then the other part of me, the more optimistic side of me, thinks that maybe it would not have been. I think that we probably would have seen a lot more. Um, I didn't live back then, so I don't know, but I think we may have been reading about a lot more reactions from the outside world if it was flipped.
Hmm.
A
Hmm.
lot more violence, probably.
Because I also can't help but to think about the argument that many people make about so-called gay marriage, that because there are white men who are gay, that means a path was made for them. So it's difficult for me. And again, there's so much more reading I have to do, but it's difficult for me not to at least think about the white male privilege that must have gone into this whole story.
Absolutely. I mean, the other piece of this is that Richard was very quiet. He didn't
Hmm.
really he didn't really say much. If you look at all the interviews, and we tried to like get a little bit of that in the opera, but it is an opera, so everybody can be quiet. Um, so he's very quiet, and Mildred is the one who's like answering the questions, and she's the one who's like taking over the conversations and things like that, which I found to be a very interesting dynamic.
When it comes to this opera or any other opera that you've written, are you at all a part of casting, or do you just show up and hope that the folks that they select bring your vision to life? How does that work?
No, I have a say in casting. And usually we try to get that early on, because if I'm writing for a specific voice,
Hmm.
then I like to know that. ahead of time. So yeah, if I'm lucky, I get to be a part of those conversations. I don't actually think I've been, yeah, I haven't been shut out of those conversations at all. And I would hope that people would want to know about casting, since I know, what I'm writing and what kind of voice we need and things like that. Because, well, maybe I shouldn't say that.
I hear you. So how are you hoping that audiences react to this? I would imagine many Virginia audience members would already be familiar, so they can come with that. But for other folks, again, is there something that you hope that they think about? Is this a means of connecting audiences who may have never attended an opera to, engage a story that they might find interesting? I wonder how you're thinking about the audience piece.
Yeah, I don't really think about it too much. Um,
They're just there.
yeah, it's sort of, I mean, in a way, I think the purpose of art is to spark conversation, right? And quite frankly, I don't want everybody to like it.
Mm,
I want to have conversations with people why people didn't like it. Um,
you're ready to fight, I see.
yeah, I'm ready to fight. I enjoy reading bad reviews. I do. I think
I'm
it's
sure you've never gotten one.
Yeah, no, no, never, never. Um, but so I get asked this question a lot. What do I want the audience to take away? And I don't. I think they're going to. I want them to take away whatever they're going to take away. And I know that's not a good answer, but I don't try to prescribe anything to an audience. I think that people have to come at it with their own lived experience and their own education, and that's going to shape how what they take out of it. I hope they come away with something. What did Denzel say? I'm leaving here with something. I hope that they leave with something, even if it's just the fact that they didn't know the case and now they do know, or if they become more empathetic to certain situations and things like this. If anything, I just hope it sparks empathy, but I don't want to prescribe what people walk away with it. Um, yeah, but this is probably the most eclectic piece of music that I have ever written. There's so many different styles in this. People ask me what my favorite piece I've ever written, and my answer is always I haven't written it yet, and I
Mhm.
still do believe that. But this is probably maybe a top five for
Oh
me.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm curious to know what people think. At the same time, I don't really care what people think.
Because the check has cashed.
The check is cash, and people are going to do it, and or they won't do it, and it's fine because there are other things that I can do with a piece of music that no one does anything with. So yeah, that was kind of a roundabout answer, but that's what it is.
It's interesting that you brought up Denzel. I was looking at, maybe you saw it as well. I was looking at an interview of him recently, and the interviewer was asking him about some of his prior roles. And he said that once the gig is done, once the movie is done, that character is gone. He doesn't really even think about him anymore. I wonder if
Mhm.
that's the case for you. Do these characters that you write, does this music you write, does it live with you? Or like Denzel, is it sort of done and now on to the next thing?
It's sort of done, and I move on.
Hmm.
I will say that when I finished writing Loving, there was a part of me that missed the characters.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have such a strong part in their creation. And I'm talking about the characters, not the actual human beings, obviously.
Sure, sure.
But there, when I got to the last bar, that there was a part of me that like kind of missed. I missed them, which doesn't always happen.
What do you do after you write that last bar of a piece of music? You're at that double bar, it's done. Is it a feeling of relief, nervousness? What are the emotions?
It's never it never feels celebratory, I will have to say. No one's ever asked me that. And I've never really thought about it, but I have thought about the fact that when I finish a piece, I'm never like, yes, I'm finished. Woo, woo, woo. I'm always kind of like, okay, it's done. Almost like it was my job.
Sure. Well, it is in a
Um,
way.
yeah. But I will say that we got the final scores from the engraver the other day, and that felt good because that made me feel like it was like officially done. Um, but it feels good, because I have to say when I start a piece, I sit down and I think, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, why are these people hiring me? I don't know how I got this job. I don't know how I got here. What is happening? How am I supposed to do this? I'm supposed to put these notes in some order that they haven't been put in before. And I don't know what I'm doing. So when I finish, I go, oh, okay, I guess I kind of know what I'm doing a little bit. But I
Hmm.
have to go through that every single time I start a piece.
I mean, I guess that's a good thing. It's like you're going through, you're giving every piece of music all of yourself. Nothing is just sort of a off the back of my hand, out my back pocket sort of thing.
Right. I care and I have to like it. If I don't like it, it's not going out in the world. Yeah.
So, what are you working on now? What's up? What's on your writing desk?
I'm working on a string quartet. I'm working on a string orchestra piece for a youth orchestra, actually. And I have some bigger projects that are happening in the next couple years. One includes a piano concerto, and some other stuff that I can't really announce yet,
Sure,
obviously.
sure.
But so yeah, so that'll keep me busy. I'm also gonna do another opera, trying to figure out what that subject is. But that won't be for another couple years or
Well,
so.
I'm gonna keep my eye out for the bassoon concerto. We need the black bassoon concerto.
Yeah, I would love to do that. That'd be fun. I love the bassoon.
Well, how can folks learn even more about you and some of your upcoming projects? Do you have a website or what would you like to plug?
Yeah, you can call me. I'm just kidding. Don't call me. Uh, yeah, I have a website, DamianGeterMusic.com, and that's Jeter with a G. And I'm on Instagram at DGETER. I'm on Facebook too.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I want to wrap up by circling back to the Blacknificent Seven. You mentioned haters, so I'm gonna go there a little bit. I'm sure you're aware that you know, it could be easy for some folks to perceive the Blacknificent Seven as some sort of contemporary manifestation of the talented tenth, and not just this laid back group of folks that you have already described. For those
Mhm.
people who may silently hold that opinion, I wonder how you would encourage them to view the work of your collective of Black artists in general as not being something exclusive or exclusionary, but something that really does, feed the entire community.
Yeah, I think if you would ask any of us, we would say we're not exclusionists at all. Like, the work that we do, you know, we hope that that is a bridge for people who are coming up after us.
Mm.
We want to be role models, and that doesn't mean that we are taking all the jobs and things like this, because if anybody is questioning that, then what are they really saying, actually? And, in fact, we have this merch through Chicago Symphony Store. We don't keep the money. Our
What?
hope is, right. Our hope is to raise funds for scholarships and, things like this to help the generation that is coming after us. Like, we leave us alone. We're just trying to exist. We're just trying to exist. And, it's an interesting thing that when Black people congregate,
Hmm.
people start asking questions about that. And, no one asked questions about Lacis or the Mighty Five, or maybe they did, and I just don't know.
The
But I didn't.
Atlanta School, a lot of these
Right.
folks.
I didn't read anything about anybody going after them. And I will have to say, it's not a lot of people going after us, but we got some people out there who are questioning our motives. But we're not out here to get anything or to take anything away from anybody. We talk to other Black composers. I'm a part of a larger group as well. And it just happens to be that the way that our chemistry works, we are friends and we like to hang out and we happen to be composers. That's what it is. And we want to give back to the community and use our platform, whatever that may be, to support and uplift other Black composers. That's it.
And that goal of uplifting and supporting other Black composers, I wonder what you think about that leading toward. Is the goal for Black composers to have equal footing? Is it the goal for broader Black communities to understand that this is a part of what we do in addition to other types of music, athletics? I wonder what this work connects to more broadly for you.
Yeah, I think it's all of those things. I think, within the industry, it is being the support for everybody who's out there trying to just make it. And like I said, I might take a commission back to the group, but that doesn't mean that we don't also have other people in mind who might be good for other things. We talk about other folks, as well. And for the purpose of your question, we want to support everybody in the industry. We want everybody to have jobs. We want everybody to be working and have opportunities and things like this. So that's what it looks like to me. And we try to support everybody.
That tune's called The Gift to Sing, another one of the many beautiful works by Damian Geter. Huge thanks to him and to all those who represent and support him for getting him on the show today. I really appreciated the conversation. And Damian, hope to spend some more time with you. I think there are lots of conversations that we could dive into. Congratulations on all of your success. So hopefully our conversation shined a light on one aspect of the history of interracial dating here in the US that you may not have been familiar with. It's a really deep conversation that has many, many aspects. And for today's Trilloquy, since we're on the topic, I thought I'd address it from my perspective a little bit. I'll start out by shouting out Dell, who most people in my sphere know or at least know of. We've been together for 8 years now. And while there have been some bumps in the road, just as there are in all relationships, we're very happy together. I remember on our very first date in Knoxville, I had to bring up the idea of dating someone Black as a fetish. There are a lot of quote unquote open-minded people out there, well, whatever that means to you. And there are a lot of people who have some sort of fetish connected to Black culture or even dark skin. I knew that if I brought it up, his reaction would tell me a lot about why he decided to go on a date with me. And I have to say that I was appreciative of his engagement of the conversation. I mean, we're still together. So, I mean, he said something right. You see, people who say that they've never heard of such a thing or surprised by the idea of non-black people dating Black folks for the sake of fulfilling a fetish. In my opinion, those folks are not to be trusted if all of it's a surprise or if this is something that folks are just unfamiliar with. I believe that there are certain contexts and perspectives that a person should have if they're trying to date interracially, and Dell has those. I mean, if I want to date someone from China and really connect with that person, there are language things that I need to deal with. If I want to date someone who, let's see, doesn't believe in engaging the grid, let's say, I better know how to camp or to make food or do something. So there are always contexts that are vital to a relationship, and that does not exclude interracial relationships. Those contexts are vital in our real life. Now, of course, race has also come up with our families. Maybe 2 or 3 weeks into dating Dell, we went and saw Get Out when it first came out. So, of course, we had to talk about what meeting each other's families would be like. And I'm, of course, happy to report that all is well on that end. There are many, many other stories and anecdotes that I could share, but I'm bringing all this up to say that dating someone white has proven to be a challenge for lots of other people in my life and in the world. And I feel like I've talked about this here before, but it's important to revisit this again since Loving versus Virginia is coming out. And I imagine, especially for Virginia audiences, that there are a lot of folks who have never really thought about this in depth or with a level of nuance. As a people, just as a general society, we're still struggling with this issue. There are white folks who are carrying the poison of their foremothers and forefathers into this dialogue. There are black people whose traumas and very valid perspectives keep them from being able to validate those of us who find love of a different shade. And, there are non-black people of color who perpetuate the very same thing in many different ways. Now, I take no pride in sharing that I've personally experienced black people from the continent, Asian folks, and even certain Latinos who are willing to fuck us, excuse my French, but who would never seriously engage us romantically. Our bodies are something that they can use, but our hearts are something that they just have no time for. Now, that conversation is one for another day, but we really need to critique the degree to which people of color, again, are willing to use black bodies, black culture, but would never engage black romance, the black heart. And I have to be clear, you'll never see me on the streets demanding that non-black people become open to romantic relationships with black folks. I believe in black love and honor the unique relationships that black people can create, cultivate, and maintain amongst ourselves. That's very important. This is not about being a pick-me at all. And I feel like Loving versus Virginia can create that dialogue if we aren't careful. This is not pick me behavior. I'm sure Mildred, who was the woman involved in this case of Loving versus Virginia, had to deal with a lot of people accusing her of, quote unquote, abandoning her race or wanting to be with a white man for some reason. And I say that because I've gotten the same accusations over the years. Right now, there are people who would allege to be my friend who simply don't respect my relationship. There are also those who feel like they have a one up on me because they're in a fully black relationship. The way I see it, especially as a queer person, is that love is hard enough to find out here. A lot of y'all are single, aren't you? I know a lot of single people who are on the prowl, and I'm grateful every day to not be one of them because the dating pool seems really in need of some pH. I'll say the dating pool. At the end of the day, my wish is for people to be happy. And also for people to go into this production of Loving versus Virginia when it comes out with as much context as possible. Black people deal with so much when we happen to fall in love outside of our race. I'm sure it's the same for white folks, but I can't speak to that. And I will fully acknowledge that there are some black people whose self-hate manifests in this way. I would be wrong to pretend that there aren't black people and people of color who date white for the sake of gaining more proximity to whiteness. But at the end of the day, it's wrong to measure someone's so-called blackness and allegiance to justice by who they happen to have fallen in love with. If I found myself single today, would I prioritize black men? Sure. I think shared culture and shared experience is very important when it comes to building a relationship. Am I happy in my current interracial relationship? Absolutely. The areas in which shared culture and experience haven't been there have been opportunities of learning and dialogue for us, which I think has contributed to what I see as our lifelong journey of mutual learning and understanding. I obviously have lots of opinions on this topic, but hopefully I'm making a point that you can understand. Loving versus Virginia isn't just about the freedom of love. It's about recognizing the struggle of love in a society that wants to maintain division more than it wants to imagine shared power through complementary existence. And this isn't even to mention all of the great black leaders who happen to find love outside of blackness. I'm thinking of Nikki Giovanni. I'm thinking of James Baldwin. There's Frederick Douglass. There's a lot of people that I can name. This isn't about being colorblind either. Del sees and experiences my blackness every day, and I hope you see and recognize the blackness of those around you in whatever relationships you're trying to build with them, platonic, romantic, or otherwise. And to my sistren and brethren out there, some of y'all are doing the work of white supremacy culture by marginalizing black men who find love in a place that you don't deem acceptable. It's all a part of the divide and conquer initiative that you fall right in line with. And if you think I'm talking to you, well, maybe I am. Shout out to Jonathan who engaged this dialogue with me. I'm going to link a clip of our conversation on the topic in the description, and maybe we can encourage him to re-release the whole thing because it garnered some heat and some and some hurt feelings. And I'll admit on my end as well, when I engage this conversation, Black people always come out of the woodwork to let me know that my quote unquote wokeness or dedication to justice is just a front for some deeply seated self-hate. It's hard for me to understand, but at the end of the day, I'm always willing to engage the conversation because I'm rooting for everybody Black, and a part of that is to shine a light on truth and justice and unity as much as I can. I'm going to do everything I can to get down to Virginia in the next few months to see this opera because I'm curious. And with a composer like Damian Geter behind it, I'm sure that it's one that is really gonna uh, benefit society in a really large way. At least benefit the arts as it were. I guess I'll stop there. Hopefully, there was something you gathered from that, and it wasn't just a rant. But yeah, if I could sum it all up, I would say that Loving versus Virginia again can't only be categorized as progress, quote unquote, for America, the freedom to love who you want. There's a conversation there that I'm sure was being had then, and that we still need to have today. Around what love is, how we can talk about the evolution of romantic relationships in the 21st century, and how we can, build unity around people who choose to date within their race, choose to date outside of their race, and to dismantle racism as it exists in between there. Again, there are especially non-Black people of color who hold on to this anti-Blackness in the name of preference or what they feel like their family would like or whatever. And that needs to be engaged while understanding, again, that this isn't about Black people wanting to be chosen by non-Black folks. We're just here to have the dialogue and to build unity across society, really diving into those conversations, uncomfortable and otherwise, that we need to have. I guess that's enough on this. Happy New Year again. Sending thoughts out to California. I'll offer some words of encouragement to everyone out there later this week. Until then, carry on. Thanks so much for listening. More for me soon. Peace.